Hey, welcome to the lounge. I know it's been a while. I know this doesn't sound too great, but I am back. I'll do a little something to talk about that. But this time around, I have Craig Campbell from NerdBurger Games coming back to talk about Good Strong Hands, a game that is double what it needed on Kickstarter as I record this. So he's doing pretty well. Check him out at NerdBurgerGames.com. And if you go on Kickstarter, you can find that. I'll also drop the link in the show notes. Won't be any after credits this time around, but I will talk to you soon. Later.
The last time you were on, you were talking about Capers. Yes,
right.
The first Capers.
The actual game. You know, the core book.
Yeah. The core book. Yeah, you've done many things since that.
It's been over 2 years.
It has, and you have been quite prolific. I'm very impressed. Let's see. You did Die Laughing.
Right.
Which I've heard only good things about, and I really want to play. You opened up the Capers universe,
yep,
which is pretty fantastic. So you've got Capers Noir, Capers Covert, Capers Offworld, even Capers Pirates, which I was super excited to find out about that.
Yeah, that's just a little PDF.
Yeah, but that's
shorter.
People who have known me for a long time as a gamer know that I've tried to do a campaign I call Powers of the Caribbean for many years now. So that was kind of a fun one. Now you're doing Good Strong Hands, which is so basically just kind of talking about like all of these projects. You like unique stuff, don't you, Craig?
I do. I make a lot of like unique systems. Like I create a system that is for that game rather than kind of figuring out a system that can be applied to a number of things. Although I might do something more with the Capers, with the playing card system from Capers at some point.
Well,
I think it's a versatile system. I think you could do more with it, and I've tinkered with it. I just haven't pulled the trigger on something.
I actually wanted to mention. I think it's really impressive that you set up the Creative Commons license in an SRD so that people can play with it a little bit if they want to. What kind of led to that decision?
I figured why not? There's not a lot of playing card systems out there, and I don't know that there's like a really open one that's available. So I threw that together. I was like, I'm doing this on the side, so it's not my bread and butter. So, like protecting the system, the copyright, that sort of thing is not as important to me. So I figured I could put it out there. Maybe somebody would find a way to spin it into some other game ideas, some other genres. And then you just ask them to attribute my game, and that becomes advertising.
Yeah.
And so, maybe something comes out of that. Maybe you get some more people that check out the original game. And it just kind of builds from there.
Well, that always makes me think of like, I heard of Dungeon World before I ever heard of Apocalypse World.
Right.
And and it's like, but because I know Dungeon World, and because I ended up hearing of Dungeon World, and have played a bunch of those games, I know Apocalypse World, and I've played Apocalypse World too. It's the rising tide lifts all boats. If people dig the system, people are going to play things in the system. So.
Provided you can find people to make more things in the system, and when you're a little bitty company and relatively little bitty game like Capers, it's not as easy to do. I do know of people who are tinkering with it, who may do something with it. It's just a question of whether or not they get it to that point. So I'm waiting to see.
Neat. I'm waiting to see. That's very cool. So between Capers and this, your Die Laughing, tell me about the response to Die Laughing.
Die Laughing, it did well enough on Kickstarter. Like it got, like all my games, they're all kind of, very genre, very niche. There's not a lot of it. There's a lot of horror games, but there's not a lot of comedy games or games that are really geared to make comedy happen. Although, as much as, comedy happens at most tables. But it was it's got a nice little following. There's people that swear by it. So I've had people contact me and say, Die Laughing is our Friday night thing. We play Die Laughing every Friday, just, like a one shot of Die Laughing. I've had people send me their custom monsters that they designed to use, just in their game. And there's a few people that who have some reach with podcasts and streams and actual play kind of stuff, who Die Laughing is their go-to for a GM-less kind of shorter game. So it's got its fan base.
That's fantastic.
And I think there's definitely room in the RPG community for more games that meld comedy into various genres. It's just that it's tricky. Comedy is tricky to do, and I'm not saying Die Laughing is like any masterpiece of comedy. It's just built around the idea of taking classic horror movie monsters and making the funny version of them, and then just telling everybody, okay, now make a B movie, make a silly movie where all your characters are going to get killed and have their deaths be as funny as possible. So just it took a long time, to be honest. Die Laughing was that game was in my head for over a decade, or some variation of that game. It went through some iterations, and it took me until I hit on the idea of you're playing characters in a horror comedy movie, before it clicked and became something, because then I could kill the character off and the player would still have something to do, because then they become a producer on the movie and they continue to influence the movie and the story that's being told. Because that's one of the downfalls of horror games is what do I do when my character dies? Well, you make another character. If you can just make a new character every time, what's the threat to the character in a horror game if it's built in that you're going to be killing characters off? So I give people something else to do.
That makes sense. It is always kind of a that's one of the issues I've always had with horror games is your character dies in the game, like Call of Cthulhu being the one example I've played quite a bit of years ago. And it's like, your character's dead. Well, I guess you're not playing with us for the rest of the night. This isn't fun. Isn't this a game? This is supposed to be fun.
Well, that was the initial challenge for me. The reason that I made the game in the first place was to create a horror game where you had something to do after your character died. And it went through different iterations. Originally the game was tentatively titled One of Them, and it was a horror game, but it was always types of horror games where your character doesn't get killed, rather they get transformed or possessed or something. So it's vampires or it's zombies or it's demon in possession or it's ghostly possession or something like that. And so when your character gets eliminated, you become your character is okay. Well, now you're a vampire, and so you would become part of the GM's team, so to speak, and you would still get a chance to play your character, but now as the monster. And the idea that I went after was that you'd start off with it's the GM, and you got a bunch of players at the table, and then as the game goes, some of those players are now playing characters that are kind of sided, so to speak, with the
Mhm.
GM, and so the other players are all of a sudden outnumbered. And it would give you this sense of like what a character in a horror story would go through, where like their friends are getting picked off, and like there's less and less support and help for them should things go bad,
Yeah.
and that would be happening at the table the whole time.
Yeah.
But I never could quite get that particular version of the game to gel.
That's a hard feel to accomplish. And comedy and horror have so much in common too, that I feel like, leveraging it to like, oh, let's get some laughs out of it. Like I think that's a solid way to go. Do you have improv background training?
I do have some. I performed at the Bristol Renaissance Fair in Southeast Wisconsin for 6 summers,
Okay.
and took improv classes and taught improv and did street theater at the fair and all that sort of thing. So I played, I played a character where I was in character for 9 hours a day.
Uh-huh.
And it was all improvisational. And my characters tended to gear toward, like, I was going for the laugh. I tended to play characters that were trying to entertain by being funny. So that's in there. That's one of the tools in my pocket for when I play games.
It's one of those things that's very notable in your design, is that you utilize improv elements. I've done improv for 20 years, what I think we've discussed before.
Mm-hmm.
And improv comedy specifically.
Right.
Those improv drama troupes not doing so great.
Long form improv drama. Hey, you can do it. I mean, I kind of did it with some of that street theater stuff. It's the biggest thing is just trying to not go for the joke. You want to push the story.
Yeah.
And it's not really terribly different from like if you're playing an RPG that's really immersive, where people are very much in character a lot. It's not terribly different. You're just moving around more. Whereas at an RPG, you tend to probably be sitting at a table, or everybody's in a living room or something like that.
I would very much like to try it. I've actually said this before. One of the things that I think that we've talked about in our group is doing like a host a murder type things. And I'm not just thinking of that because of your background from Knives Out, which is an amazing movie.
Yeah, I've got the Knives Out wall of the lattice full of knives behind me on Zoom.
But like doing something like that, feels like you could actually get some drama out of it. I don't know. I'd very much like to try it because I love role playing and I love doing improv. But I enjoy though that the mixing of horror and comedy is something that you're able to build with both those tools as well, like with improv tools.
Well, they go together well because the best horror stories are build up, scary, tense, creepy, maybe gory, build up, release.
Yeah.
And a joke, or a comedic moment is a great way to release. So you can build up and release and build up and release and build up, and you can create a rhythm in the game. Which, I tried to facilitate, tried to replicate with good, strong hands. Now, you're also at the whim of the dice a little bit, so you don't necessarily kill characters as regularly. So the build up to like the bad moment when the character's going to die, or you're going to play up the creepy factor or anything like that, doesn't necessarily come as evenly as you might like. The horror movie, and action movies do the same thing too. It's action sequence, story and funny. Action sequence, story and funny.
Well, I'm glad you transitioned to Good Strong Hands, because I actually wanted to talk about, like, it does kind of have that escalation though, and I think of comedy in that way of, like, crafting a good joke. There's this element. I don't do stand up. I have before, but I don't do it regularly, and but write a lot of stand up.
Sure.
And there's something to like crafting that and working on that. And having played Good Strong Hands, it feels like that same kind of thing, but not funny. It feels important in a weird way. If that's,
Well, the game's about saving the world, so
Yeah.
I hope that it comes across as important in the game, and that people, when they play it, that they kind of get into that mindset that this isn't just an adventure. That's just one of many adventures that your fantasy characters are going on. You are literally, every step that you take in this adventure, even if it's just a one shot, in every story that you play in a campaign, is working toward making sure your world and everything that you care about survives.
Let's talk about like the big pitch of it. So if so our audience can kind of get an idea. And as of this release, it is on Kickstarter. So we'll have links in the show notes and all that fun stuff. But
Yep.
but go for it.
Sure. Well, Good Strong Hands, it's a fantasy tabletop role-playing game where you are portraying fantastic creatures and their human allies from Earth who come to this world to save your world, which is called Reverie, from destruction by a faceless, malevolent force known as the Void, which is just a renaming of the Nothing from Neverending Story. And there are other fantasy stories that have had that, that pervading sort of everywhere force of darkness that is trying to destroy everything. I mean, that's what Sauron is. In Lord of the Rings. It just happens to be, in the movie, he happens to be an eye on top of a tower, but in the books, I mean, he's just like this ephemeral thing that's trying to destroy.
The faceless big bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're fighting against that. It draws inspiration from, obviously, Neverending Story, Legend, Dark Crystal, Labyrinth, Willow, all those sorts of, mostly, like, a lot of them are very whimsical fantasy movies. They're a little more lighthearted, although they do have their dark moments that are just kind of like part of my youth and growing up. And I think a lot of other people share a fondness for those stories. So I thought I'd make a game that is a fantasy game that hits some of that sort of thing, but then give it a twist of there's the darkness actually has in-game effect, where as you're striving to save the world and to vanquish the Void, you are proving yourself to be a hero, and the Void notices that and tries to corrupt you and to turn you into one of its agents. So you're having to work, you either resist the Void, or maybe you accept a little bit of it and you get some power out of it. You're going to walk that line, but you don't want to walk the line too close, because you could potentially have your character fall completely. And that's when you hand your character sheet to the GM, and you don't get to play that character anymore because they have become a dark version of themselves. So yeah, that's the basics of the game.
Great. What we're like, obviously, you talked about the influences and whatnot. What made it? At what point were you like, this is a game that I have to like get out into the universe?
Well, it was weird because I've made a few different games and they're all in non-fantasy genres. And I told myself, like, since I started doing stuff with NerdBurger Games, I was like, I'm not going to make a fantasy game unless I find like a really interesting hook for a type of game that either doesn't exist or isn't, it's you have a hard time finding it, or maybe it was something like some sort of game like that was made once, but it's out of print, and so nobody can find it. And I wasn't going to make a traditional kind of swords and sorcery medieval fantasy, because there's 100 of those, and if with every possible type of system that you can think of. So there's every type of world, every different little bent on that. So it just kind of floated for a while until I was watching Legend, well over a year ago, and I was like, oh, this is like a great little fantasy story. And It's got this great big, big bad guy, and he's got minions, and we've got a hero that's out to do the right thing, and there's mystical, unicorns, and the hero's got allies. They're all these like weird, fantastical creatures, and I was like, well, we could make a game that does that. And so I started just, kind of toying with that idea, and then eventually it shaped itself over the course of many months into what the kind of game has become, which is also like I took the tack of like, I'm going to set this apart from your typical D&D-ish style stuff. There are no elves, no dwarves, no gnomes, no halflings, no ogres, goblins, orcs, hobgoblins, gnolls, no drow. There are dragons because, you got to have a dragon.
I mean, yeah.
And there are some other creatures, but then you're playing, brownies and pixies and like stone elemental type creatures. And like there's a type of folk that you can play in the game that is kind of based on Sir Didymus from Labyrinth, the little wolf guy, or the little fox guy. And humans are there, but they are the oddity. They're from Earth and they've come to Reverie. Reverie doesn't have a native human population, so humans are kind of weird, and they're the minority. And so it's like creating a world that didn't have as much of the baggage that's associated with some of those other fantasy races. Like I didn't like, people aren't going to necessarily say, like if somebody plays a dwarf, like a lot of people are just going to go in, they're going to snap into D&D dwarf mindset. Like, well, what's a dwarf like? Exactly what D&D tells you a dwarf is like.
Right.
So I picked, types of creatures that you could play that don't have as much of that baggage there. And avoided utilizing the bad guy creatures, so to speak, because there's baggage associated with all of them. Orcs and drow and everything have a lot of history and kind of where they came from and how they were devised by fantasy authors and what they were supposed to represent. And it's like, throw that all away. I don't want to. Let's let the folk that you can play could also be the bad guys, because some of them have decided to ally themselves with the void for whatever reason. And then you can throw in other things like, just monstrous animals and beasts and things that just, function by instinct. And you can throw in the weird stuff like undead and stuff that can be kind of mindless and killing machines.
Sure.
But you're not dealing with like, there's no overtly monumentally evil race in the game.
Yeah, which is something that I noted in playing it. I really dug the idea that like, here's this tracker on your sheet that is telling you, you can get corrupted by the void, and then you're meeting people that are corrupted by the void, or like, and it's kind of like it makes that feel a little bit more real. One of the things that I noted about a lot of your influences is when I was real young, obviously I watched those. I mean, I loved Legend. I watched The Never-Ending Story and like all those movies. But one of the things that I feel like I learned from those was that it's okay to feel despair as long as you know that there can be hope as well. Like Never-Ending Story is the one I always think of as like,
I know exactly where you're going.
Yeah.
And it was a big moment for me when I first saw The Never-Ending Story.
It's and people will talk about that like, oh my God, it was traumatizing, but it's like, but there's hope there. Like that's kind of what I learned is like, yeah, things can get really bad, but you can keep trying to make it better.
We're talking about Artax, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So spoilers. Hey everybody, it's a 35-year-old movie. When Atreyu loses Artax, when Artax drowns, it's just like, I remember watching that for the first time. I was like, Atreyu and his trusty steed, and he's the hero, and he's going to do all the great stuff, and now the horse is dead?
Yeah.
And Atreyu could not save his best friend?
Yeah.
What the hell did I just watch?
It is. It's heartbreaking.
It is absolutely heartbreaking. It's right there with, we see it in the, a decade or so ago with both Gandalf's fall,
Mm-hmm.
and the grief after that, and with Boromir
Oh yeah.
dying, and then the hopefulness that has to rise to the surface as the characters continue on. Like for the younger generations who are thinking of like, okay, that's the heart-wrenching moment from a fantasy movie, like that was in it with that for them, for a movie that's more recent, for Neverending Story, for a lot of us, that was a big deal.
That was the moment. I mean, even to the point where like Legend had, the corruption scene where she is like totally corrupted, and it was like, what hope do they have? Like I don't know. I feel like like all of those kind of had those moments of like
the heroine like loses herself to darkness, to the the big devil.
Yeah,
Tim Curry.
And that's what it is. It's the good guys actually have lost, and then it's like, but no, you can do more. And I feel like you can adequately good strong hands feels like you can adequately do that. So
I hope so. It's freeform enough, and the GM and the players are kind of creating the world together, so that you can insert things that are sad. You can put something into the game that is very sad. Like if you're playing the game and you're playing a pixie, you could decide that there's only 20 pixie left in the world for whatever reason. And that can be a very sad thing and have a lot of pathos attached to it. Because I don't decide in the game book how many pixie there are and how they function and what their society is like and whether they have a religion or whatever. So you can make that what you want it to be. And so you can do that with the world. You can do that with the other folk that are out there. You can do that with your characters. You can do that within the confines of the story that you're telling. And there will be people who will play the game and they'll keep it light and whimsical and they won't really fiddle too much with the darkness kind of stuff. But then there will be people that will take the game as license to go there.
Yeah.
Occasionally. And have that really deep, gut-wrenching, heartbreaking moment.
Yeah. One of I think the whimsical nature of the character archetypes that you present, and the way it's presented, almost gives people that permission to go there, because it's not. It's like pixie on pixie violence. Like it's not, because it's not. If it was just like orcs or something like that, I think people will often quote unquote dehumanize those races, as you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
you can kill an orc with no consequences. And I'm not saying that's wrong or right. I'm saying that that's a simple way to do it, and that there are more complex ways to do it. And that was part of the reason that no standard, like I said, no dwarves or elves or anything like that, because the assumption is there's forests full of elves.
Yeah.
There's elves everywhere. There's a bunch over there. There's a bunch over there, and every forest has a bunch of elves in it.
Yeah,
and they're eternal, and they all live to be 700 years old, and elves are never going to completely go away. But if you've got the void that's coming in and wiping out the world, why aren't the elves gone?
Right.
Maybe they are.
Right.
or whatever whatever folk you're using, whatever people that you're using. You could play a campaign of this and have literally whole populations get destroyed.
Yeah, disappear
as part of the story, or not.
Yeah.
But it's available as an option, because there's not there's nothing written in the game that says this is how it is, and there's less that's built into the game as far as tropes and expectations of certain fantasy creatures.
Have you in your experience with playtesting this, Have you run into any issues with players taking part in the world building process?
Not really. It's like some players are more vocal at the table in general,
Mm-hmm.
in any game, right?
Any game, yeah.
And so some will get into creating and helping to build the world more than others will. And some just won't necessarily get into it that much, or they'll need a little more prompting from the GM. They'll need permission. They'll feel like they need permission. Like the GM asks you a question. Oh, well, now I can answer that question and help fill in this blank in the world. So the game is built on the idea that the players can build these things with the GM. The GM is supposed to ask questions. In the game book, there are story schemes, which are like 2-page adventures. And part of what's in there is questions for the GM to ask that is intended to kind of help nudge the players into that kind of mindset of you're going to help me build the world here. You're going to fill in some of the details. The hope being that if the players are filling in the details of this world, they are helping to build their version of Reverie, and then they're going to save it. And that hopefully they are more invested in saving the world because they had a hand in making it.
Yeah, yeah.
As opposed to saving my world that Craig Campbell designed for them to save.
Right. Well, that's it's such a cool thing to have prompts instead of blocks of text.
There is no box text anywhere in the book. Let me think. Do I have anything in there that you're supposed to read out loud to other people? I don't think there's anything like that. There's questions to ask.
Yeah.
There's no paragraph of like, well, this is how you describe this area.
Yeah.
This is what this person looks like.
This is where these candles are located. Yeah. Do you have any advice for anybody that's running this? Do you have any advice for kind of getting maybe more hesitant players to open up? It basically kind of like, I guess, helping to even out that difference. If you've got a couple players that are super vocal and a couple players that are more hesitant, like, do you have any advice for balancing that out a little bit?
I would say that like GMs could do with that similar to what they might do with players that like to role play more and are more vocal in describing their character and speaking in character and so forth, as opposed to players who tend to be more reserved and they just describe what their character does very matter-of-factly, and don't necessarily embellish or get into playing, speaking as the character, is to give players give them all the opportunity to do that. Make sure you go around and you're asking the questions of all the players. But also, if you ask a person, and this has happened actually a couple times with playtesting. If I asked somebody a question to fill in and they felt like they were maybe they felt a little on the spot and suddenly they just brain freeze and they didn't know what to answer and they just couldn't come up with a good idea. And just reassure them and say, okay, I mean, we can throw that to somebody else. Yeah. If a player is kind of stymied and not sure what they want to say to help fill out something, take it off of them. Don't just leave it. Don't leave the weight on. Everybody stare at them and wait for them to answer a question. Like if they take a little while to kind of formulate something, if it feels like they're drawing away from the table a little bit, like they're, just give them permission to like say, no, it's okay. You don't have to fill in that question. We can ask somebody else.
Yeah. Create that safety space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's good. And I find that when you do that, eventually those players will feel comfortable contributing.
And if you're playing in a campaign, you're playing multiple sessions. If you're paying attention as a GM, eventually you'll find everybody's sweet spot. You'll find out like, okay, this person's going to say 2 or 3 things. When they say those things, they're important. Make sure that they come, make sure that I use those things in the game, because this person's only going to, give me that a couple of times a session. This person over here is going to talk a lot, and they're going to have a lot to say, and make sure, incorporate some of what they're doing, but don't let it become all about them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of campaigns, actually, that's another thing I wanted to kind of really dig in on. I played a one shot of this, obviously. The idea of like this feels like automatically it can be a campaign game because of the subject matter. I mean, it's that's a big thing. Like saving the world is a big deal.
Yeah, it could very easily be something that takes a long time.
I was going to ask, do you kind of foresee that this is the kind of thing where you can do the one shot, or you could do the short campaign, or you could do the long-term campaign?
Yeah, that was kind of designed into the game, was that like you can tell a one shot that is going to, like, okay, the Void's doing this thing, this bad thing's happening. You can go in there, you can save these people, or rescue this situation, or make sure this town doesn't get destroyed, or vanquish this minion of the Void, or whatever. And that has a like you've done the good thing for that area or that people or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a story.
Yeah,
that's a story of the ongoing struggle against the Void, and here's a chapter in that story.
Yeah.
Or you can play a shorter campaign if that's all you've really got in you, or that's all people really want to do. Or you can play really long. Let it really stretch out. Let people fill those tracks up and gain corruptions and get closer and closer to possibly losing characters, and then have somebody have their character fall to the Void and have to play a different character, and maybe there's a way to get that character back and redeem them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that can be done with that.
That sounds so meaty and juicy. Like that sounds like such a thing that would be fun to play around in. I love a good like long campaign with a big narrative, and that sounds like just the thing. Yeah, so I mean, let's talk a little about the Kickstarter itself.
Sure.
So you're launching on the 22nd of September, which is maybe a couple days ago, or might be today, depending on when somebody's listening to it.
Right.
And you're going through, is it 30 days?
It'll be like a 30-day one. Yeah, it'll go to the 22nd of October, which is a Thursday.
Awesome. Do you want to talk about the different levels?
The backer tiers, sure. It's fairly straightforward. There's a $20 tier that gets you the PDF and any stretch goals. Like basically the game is done, designed, ready to go. It's a matter of like the funding goal is to kind of get the smallest version of the game. Like here's the slim version where we've paid this much for art and we paid this much for layout. Mm-hmm. And then stretch goals will add more stuff to it and allow, put more art in there to accompany that and do layout and everything. So there will be stretch goals to kind of fatten the book up. So $20 is PDF. There's a $40 tier that gets you the PDF and then also a hardcover. And a $60 tier that's a PDF with a signed Kickstarter exclusive hardcover, which is being designed like today. And this is like a little bit before the campaign. My
as this is being recorded, yeah,
and that's going to be like, if things go well and the game does well enough, the idea we'll start as a POD book, print on demand, and do that sort of a hardcover. And if it does well enough, with total backing dollars and with number of people actually getting a book, then we'll shift up to doing an actual offset print run, and we'll get like a sewn binding, like really nice, super sturdy book that's going to have a little more oomph, and it'll be prettier in general, just because just better materials and better color. Mm-hmm. And so, but then there'll be like that exclusive Kickstarter hardcover. Like that, I'll print enough for the people who are getting the book, and then a few copies for myself, and that's it. Nobody gets to buy them afterwards. And then there's a tier that is the premium tier, which is up there in the triple digits, where in the game there's what I call story schemes, which are like 2-page adventures. And they describe the basics, here's the skeleton of an adventure. Here's basically what a little bit of the history that leads you into it, what's going on, what the characters need to do, questions to ask the players, and then a series of inspirations for, like, here's NPCs and adversaries that you might run into. Here are locations that you might come across. Here are some of the different types of challenges that you might incorporate into this, along with some of those challenges being fleshed out a little more. And with the premium tier, it's called Historic Hero. The backer will help me design a trilogy of thematically linked story scheme. So you'll have a beginning, middle, and an end to an overall story that is all kind of tied together in some sort of theme. And then in addition to that, there will also we'll build, like, in the backer will have input at a few different points, but I'll design it with their involvement, basically. And then there will also be information that's like, oh, okay, and here's how you can take some of these other story schemes and incorporate them into this to make a longer campaign. And here are ideas for other things that you can invent whole cloth with just, like, inspirations and story seeds that you can incorporate into this. So you could take that trilogy and turn it into a short campaign or turn it into a long campaign. And I kind of like the idea of the trilogy, even standalone. The trilogy is kind of neat. Like, that's a nice round, like, given that this game is movie inspired, like literally having a trilogy, is a nice way to play the game if you want to just play 3 sessions and say, okay, we set everything up, and then there's like the middle act where everything kind of goes to hell, and then the third act where everybody wraps it all up and things go better, and you vanquish the void and save the day, and then someday your great grandchildren have to do it again because the void keeps coming back.
Because it keeps coming back. That's amazing. That's really cool. I love so much when Kickstarters have, like, game design tiers. Like, it's such a cool thing to be able to offer to people, because if you're paying attention to Kickstarter on a regular basis, there's a good chance you want to design stuff, but where do you start? Well,
Right, and I think having it themed helps nicely for, I hope, backers that back at that tier will find that really fun, because they can say, like, okay, well, I know basically what this game is about, but I want to do like the high heroic version of the game, where it's like all the characters are bright and shining examples of goodness and light, and so you can build a trilogy that's what it's all about, and they're all paladin like super good characters. You can have a theme that's everything's kind of down and dirty, and you can have a theme where, like, the void is like this close to winning right now. How are we going to claw out from the rubble and actually manage to pull this off? I've got a series of possible themes, and then that I'll offer up to the backer, and then the backer can also suggest, like, if they have an idea for something thematic to tie through the 3 stories.
Yeah, that's cool. The collaboration, that's just a cool idea.
It'll be fun. And it's going to take a few months to get the game together, so we'll have time to crunch through that all with it's limited to 5 backers, so
yeah.
Keep it reasonable.
I was going to ask as many as possible. I don't know.
No, 5 is plenty. 5 is lots.
5 is, yes. 5 is.
That's 15. That's 15. That's 15 2-page adventures plus the support. A couple pages of support for each one.
By the way, for everybody not at that level, if you get all 5, that's a lot of content for them to get with this game. So that's really awesome too.
Yeah, it's like 40. If all those backer tiers get taken, that's like another 40 plus pages.
Yeah,
in the book.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, fantastic. So that's going on right now. what's next for you?
Oh boy, I've been toying around with a few different things. We talked about Capers briefly, and like the Capers game takes you from the 20s to the 40s to the 60s, and I have some stuff kind of written, and I've got a lot to go. But to take Capers to a more modern era and turn it into a cyberpunk game, because if you pay attention to the previous game and supplements, there's the beginning of not so much mega corporations, but there's the beginning of Capers being a controlled class of people. Like there's a national registry that you're supposed to be on if you've got superpowers. And by the time you get to Capers Covert in the 60s, like if you're not registered, you're considered a rogue agent, and there's, potential repercussions for that. Now take that and progress that a little, several decades further.
Dystopia.
Have megacorps rise.
Yeah.
Have them usurp a lot of the power of the government. And have Capers, these superpowered people, basically become second-class citizens, in terms of wanting to be controlled and monetized by the megacorps.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working on that. I'm not sure when that will happen. It's a lot to write.
That's a big, yeah.
It's a bigger that book will be bigger than Capers.
Yeah.
Even in its smallest version, it'll be bigger than the first Capers book. Got an idea for a game that's essentially like Stephen King, the story. Stephen King, the role playing game. Like a small town with weird horror and stuff going on. And I think what's probably going to be the next thing in you got a chance to try this out a few days back is a game called Low Stakes, which is basically it's what we do in the Shadows, the role-playing game with the serial numbers filed off.
Yeah.
So you're playing vampires and werewolves and humans and ghosts and whatnot living in the modern day and being very out of place and not very good at just living day-to-day normal mundane lives. And that's a heavily improvisational game that's kind of built around just failing.
Yeah.
a lot. Like your character should succeed on some stuff, but every character has problem areas, has things that they're just not very good at, based on the archetype that you're playing. And so you're going to fail a bunch at some of those things. And it's got a certain level of humor, and potentially cringy humor, which is normally a little bit of a for me, but it's there. It's a question of how you decide to play it in the game. But yeah, like your characters are not very good at living in the real world. They're petty. They're not very good at socializing with anybody that isn't a monster.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they have all their monster baggage that they're dealing with.
That was we it was the first playtest of that we did, right?
Lots of problems we found.
we found, well, then that's the thing, that's hey, it's the first playtest, of course you're going to, but I will say, like, conceptually, I so love that idea. It's such a cool idea.
I'm looking forward to developing it further, and I think that'll be a real small little, like, zine-sized kind of thing. It'll be 30 something pages, very simple rules, a bunch of archetypes, and then a bunch of scenarios. Like when we play tested, we played the scenario called Host a Party. And the characters, that was literally the whole event. The whole story was, it took about an hour to play, and the characters tried to host a party, and things went poorly.
Oh, so poorly.
Oh, well, your character had not fed for 2 days and murdered a party goer, like, almost immediately.
By the way,
and then did a terrible job at hiding the body. And accidentally made this woman into a vampire.
Yeah.
Who then came back to cause problems at the end.
And just so everybody out there in listener land knows, the role that I had was caregiver. So this is a game about failure.
Yeah, he was playing the caregiver character who, well, it's you kind of fit the role actually, because the caregiver archetype is like they're all about helping other people. They never notice their own problems. They don't take care of themselves properly. They don't think about their own consequences. They just constantly try to help other people, and so they end up biting their, but everything ends up biting them in their own ass if it concerns them. And so like this character just wasn't thinking, and
it worked. It worked to make me laugh at failing at a game, which is a thing that, if you play role playing games for a long time is hard to do. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Failure is great. I love failure.
Failure can be fun. Well, fantastic. I'm going to encourage everybody out there to check out Good Strong Hands on Kickstarter right now. Back at the highest level that's left. And check out
or at whatever you can afford.
Or whatever you can afford. Yes.
It's fine too.
Yes. Also check out Craig's other stuff, NerdBurgerGames.com.
Yep, NerdBurgerGames.com. Stuff's available at DriveThruRPG.com. However, if you do check out the Kickstarter and you decide to back that, don't go and buy the games over at the other outlets. There are add-ons in the Kickstarter. You can get the other game books generally at a discount, like at a cheaper price than what is being offered via drive-thru or my web store.
Very cool.
So that's another way to help fund this game and get you some other interesting, cool, fun games too.
Yeah. Very cool. And they're great designs. I actually have immediately behind me, just out of reach, I have Capers Space. The
Capers Offworld.
Offworld, thank you.
The purple one.
Yeah, I like it. I just call it Capers in Space.
Yeah, that's what it is. Space Gangsters.
Space Gangsters, which is so cool. But so check out all Craig's stuff. Thank you, Craig, for being on the first episode of the new season of The Lounge. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. You are always welcome in the lounge.
All right, I'll see you next week. We'll talk about how the Kickstarter is going.
Yay! Hey, you joke, but I think that would be a really cool thing. But in the meantime, we have our motto here. Do you remember it?
Oh boy,
it's okay if you don't.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I always like
bad person.
I always like to have our guests tell the audience to keep it classy. So if you wouldn't mind doing the honors.
Oh sure. Hey everybody listening to the lounge, keep it classy.
Nice.
You can make that, and I give you permission as long as Jesse says it's okay as well to make that like a ringtone or a notification dinger or something like that too.
Oh, that's even better.
Cut that out. Whenever somebody sends you a text, keep it classy.
The Lounge is a Misdirected Mark production. the media arm of Encoded Designs, with lots of great shows like this one. Misdirected Mark. Chris, Phil, Bob, and Camden go live every Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern to break down and get inside games, game mastering, playing games, and game design in an effort to entertain and inform you. The lounge theme, And So It Begins by Artificial Music, is used under Creative Commons 3.0. Support Contessa at contessa.rocks. Find your host, Jesse Doc Edmond, at Doc Palindrome on Twitter. All the links from this episode can be found in the episode description.